I've heard the book of Acts, Acts chapter 2, preached a lot in church, so I've heard it read in church a lot, and I never get tired of it. It chokes me up every time I hear it read, including tonight. I want to highlight verse 1, Acts chapter 2, verse 1, and when the day of Pentecost was fully come. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, another name for Pentecost is Feast of Weeks. Another name of Feast of Weeks is Feast of Harvest. So when the day of Pentecost was first come, that's a very popular Old Testament holiday. God-fearing men from all over the world, they were required or they're commanded to come to Jerusalem to worship the Lord for one day. God-fearing men from Parthia. God-fearing men from Asia. God-fearing men from Media. God-fearing men from Elam. God-fearing men from all over the world were commanded to come to Jerusalem to worship the Lord for one day. So how is God going to get those God-fearing men saved in one day? Verse 17, I want to highlight verse 17. And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God. And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. And your young men shall see visions. And your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaidens I will pour out in those days of my spirit, and they shall prophesy. So God's solution for getting God-fearing men saved is to pour out His Spirit upon all flesh. All flesh means men, women, young women, older men, and so forth. It seems that that number was 120 people. So God poured out His flesh upon 120 preachers, and they went out to preach the gospel to a great multitude of people. Well, how did they do? Verse 41. Acts chapter 2, verse 41. Then they that gladly received His word were baptized, and the same day there were added unto them about 3,000 souls. So this group, this army, they got 3,000 people saved in one day. That's quite a number. That's a lot of people getting 3,000 people saved in one day. That's quite a record. I don't know of any other day in the Bible where 3,000 people got saved in one day. I don't know of any other day in the Bible from Genesis chapter 1 to today, from Genesis chapter 1 to Revelation chapter 6, from Revelation chapter 1, chapter 12, verse 1 to Revelation chapter 1, verse 1 to verse 5. I don't know of any other day in the Bible that 3,000 people got saved. That might be a record. That might be a biblical record. And quite frankly, it might be a historical record. I don't know of any day in the world, in world history, where 3,000 people got saved in one day. From 4,294 BC or whatever up to today, I don't know if there's ever been 3,000 people getting saved in one day. But let me tell you something, 75 hours from now, that record might fall. 75 hours from now or 3 days from now, you all know there's going to be a mega marathon going on. We got at least 100 venues out there. We got soul winners from all over the world. They're going to go out there and preach the gospel. And when those final numbers come in from the South Pacific, when those final numbers come in from Honolulu, there's a chance that record just might fall. That would be exciting. Amen. Wouldn't that be exciting to be part of that? Wouldn't that be exciting if this record, the day of Pentecost, this record that's been standing for 1,985 years, wouldn't that be exciting if this record fell 3 days from now? Wouldn't that be exciting to be part of it? Yeah. And not only that, but what if we did it next year? Why not have Soul Winning Marathon next year? We have more venues, more soul winners, and more people getting saved, and crush that record all over again. And why not the year after that? Why not every year till Jesus comes back? Why not shatter this record on the day of Pentecost? This record that's been standing for 1,985 years. You know, Revelation chapter 12 says that the saints are going to be war with Satan. Daniel chapter 11 says those saints are at war with Satan. Those who know their God are going to be strong and do exploits. Amen. Well, if the day of Pentecost record gets shattered every single year until Jesus comes back, if that's not a fulfillment of Daniel chapter 11, if that's not a fulfillment of doing great exploits, I don't know what is. Right. If that doesn't get you excited to go out soul winning Saturday, I don't know what will get you excited. Okay. The title of this message is Guerrilla Warfare Evangelism, Small Town Soul Winning. Guerrilla Warfare Evangelism, parentheses, small town soul winning. Okay, I'm going to first explain what guerrilla warfare evangelism is all about. I'm going to identify two characteristics with guerrilla warfare evangelism. Number one, the people who participate in guerrilla warfare evangelism are typically volunteers. They're not on the payroll. And number two, people who participate in guerrilla warfare evangelism, they know how to cover their fear. They know how to control their fear. After that, we're going to get deeper into small-town soul-winning, principles of small-town soul-winning. I've identified about 70 verses that Jesus taught about small-town soul-winning, and I have 10 points associated with that. Let's go to 1 Chronicles chapter 27. 1 Chronicles chapter 27. So what is guerrilla warfare evangelism? Well, in my opinion, it's a mindset. It's a philosophy on how to do soul winning. It's a philosophy on how to do evangelism, and it's focused on or kind of patterned after guerrilla warfare in general. You know, when you study the Bible, if you study warfare, there's typically two kinds of warfare in the Bible. There's the large-scale warfare where you have army against army. You see this with the children of Israel fighting the army of the Philistines. But there's also a smaller warfare that's kind of called guerrilla warfare or fast attack warfare. And you see it with David and his mighty men when they do a lot of raids on smaller towns and villages outside of Ziklag. Okay? Now, there's advantages to both. I would say the advantage to guerrilla warfare is, number one, you get immediate results. Number two, it doesn't tax you as far as resources or planning and so forth. It's quite frankly easy to do. And number three, it's pretty safe. You can typically move in and move out, and the enemy has no idea what just happened. Okay. Now, what's interesting is David's army is patterned after doing both kinds of warfare very effectively. Now, in my opinion, David's army is the most powerful army in the Bible. We see a lot of powerful armies in the Bible. We see the Egyptians with mighty armies. We see the Syrians with mighty armies. We see Nebuchadnezzar with a mighty army. But I would venture to say David's army was the most vicious, most successful, most powerful army. And the reason why I say that is he went 40 years without losing a fight. Not only did they not lose a fight, but they did not retreat one time. Nebuchadnezzar, he had a powerful army, but there was a battle where they actually retreated when they saw the Egyptians. David's army did not do that. And what's interesting is with all the armies in the Bible, we learn about how David's army was structured. It's a very interesting structure. And you might be asking, well, why are you talking about warfare? Why are you talking about warfare in response to evangelism? Well, let me tell you something. The Old Testament warfare is actually a picture of evangelism in the New Testament, okay? The Old Testament or carnal warfare is a picture of spiritual warfare in the New Testament. And when you look at battles in the Old Testament, you can learn a lot of powerful spiritual principles to help you in the New Testament. I think this is a pretty powerful principle. Let's look at how David's army was set up. Verse 1, 1 Chronicles chapter 27. Now the children of Israel, after their number, to wit, the chief fathers and captains of thousands and hundreds and their officers that served the king in any matter of the courses which came in and went out month by month throughout all the months of the year of every course were 20 and 4,000. So the Bible tells us that David basically had 12 divisions or 12 regiments of 24,000 men. Okay? And these men, they would come in and they will cycle in every month. So each month at his palace, he had a different set of 24,000 people. Okay, let's go on. Verse 2. Over the first course of the first month was Jashobeam, the son of Zabdiel, and his course were 20 and 4,000. Now the interesting thing about Jashobeam, he is David's mightiest warrior. There's a couple chapters in the Bible that talk about David's mighty men. Jashobeam was his number one guy. This guy killed 800 people with his sword in one battle. This was his number one guy, and this guy is in charge of the first division or the first regiment or the first 24,000. Okay, verse 3, of the children of Perez was the chief of all the captains of the host for the first month. Verse 4, and over the course of the second month was Dodai and Ahohite, and of his course was Mikloth, also the ruler, and his course likewise were 20 and 4,000. So this guy, Dodai, he's David's number 2 warrior. Now this guy, in a battle, the children of Israel almost retreated in this battle. The children of Israel were retreating from the battle. This man, Dodai, he stood his ground in a parcel of barley, and his hand cleaved under the sword, and he not only stopped the enemy, but he and his comrades, they were able to push back the momentum, and they went in and they won the war. So one man preventing them from retreating, it was this man's Dodai, okay? So he's a mighty man. Verse 5, the third captain of the host for the third month was Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the chief priest, and his course were 20 and 4,000. Now this is David's number 3. This is David's mighty man. This is the guy who climbed in the lion's pit and killed a lion. You got to be pretty bad to be able to do that, okay? Yeah. This guy was actually David's captain of the guard. He was like his head bodyguard, okay? So this guy is a pretty powerful guy. And if you go through all 12 of these guys, these are all 12 David's mighty men, okay? Now the thing, at the end of the chapter, points out that Joab was a general of the army, okay? So we have some very notable people, that we have 24,000 people, different 24,000 people rolling into the palace every single year. So what did they do the other 11 months? I assume they went out to their fields. I assume they went out to their cattle. These guys are on a volunteer basis. So basically, David's army was a 360,000 man army, and they rotated in 24,000. Now what's interesting, at all times, David had 24,000 men at his disposal. There's a phrase used, I think, by the Marine Corps that says sudden and immediate call. Okay, I guess the Marine Corps, their early history is they were specialists in guerrilla warfare. Okay, so they talked about a sudden and immediate call, and they wrote a manual on warfare, guerrilla warfare, and so forth. David, at his disposal at all times, he had 24,000 men. He had instant offense at any time he wanted. He had instant defense at all times. And his mighty man, they were all part of his security force, so those guys are there full time. Joab is there full time, but everybody else was at home, so I assume these 12 leaders, they could go out and get their guys real quickly. So if they need a large-scale warfare, they probably moved very quickly. And you see David mobilizing his troops very quickly. So David not only had a guerrilla warfare aspect, but he also had a large warfare also. Okay. So what am I trying to say? A vast majority of this army, a vast majority of the greatest army in the Bible, maybe the greatest army in history, were volunteer. We've kind of seen a shift in our evangelism or our missions over the last couple of years as we started out by going to Botswana. We did a great work in Botswana. A vast majority of the people who went to Botswana were volunteers. They were not on the payroll. Okay? They did a great work. Shortly thereafter, we went to Malawi. Another course moved in. Another group of volunteers moved in. They did a powerful work there. Guyana, we had another group that moved in there as well. Volunteers, people who are not on the payroll, they moved in and did a great work. We also saw a great work, even greater work in Jamaica. We just constantly seen a rotation of volunteers, people who are not on the payroll, people who are part of this, this great work. You compare that model, you compare this model of guerrilla warfare, which is basically you take a small group of volunteers, give them some light leadership, and just let them just tear up the enemy and get out of there before the enemy knows what's going on. That's been a very effective model for us, and it's probably going to continue to be very effective. And here we see it's quite biblical. David always had 24,000 men at his disposal for instant offense. And he grew up, his early days was guerrilla warfare. So he knows how to start an attack very well. And you compare that to the Goliath mentality. You compare that to, let's raise up a champion, let's send him to a foreign country, and let's let him talk some smack, get his head cut off, and not get anybody killed, or not get anybody saved. That's kind of the old school missions, where you raise up a champion, you send off to another land, and he does nothing but talk a bunch of smack, and he gets killed. Right. I don't know about you, but I don't want to put my money in a champion who's going to get his head cut off. Who's not going to get anybody saved, okay? I'd rather do it myself, missions, go in myself, save up my paychecks. Maybe I can go to Malawi. Maybe I can get deployed to Botswana. Maybe I can get deployed to Aruba. Go in there, tear it up, and the enemy has no idea what just happened. Just come on back home and go back to work. Go back to my field and so forth, okay? Right. So the first point I want to point out about guerrilla warfare evangelism is, number one, it's basically made up of a bunch of volunteers. Okay, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 20. I'm amazed in Deuteronomy chapter 20, it has some general advice about warfare in general. And I'm just amazed at just how much it talks about fear. It talks about controlling your fear. Now look at this. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 1. When thou goest out to battle against thine enemies and seest horses and chariots and the people more than thou, be not afraid of them. For the Lord thy God is with thee, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. When it shall be, when ye are come nigh unto the battle, that the priest shall approach and speak unto the people, and shall say unto them, Hear, O Israel, ye approach this day unto battle against your enemies. Let not your hearts faint, fear not, and do not tremble, neither be ye terrified because of them. For the Lord your God, he is that goeth with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. Let's skip over to verse 8. And the officer shall speak further unto the people, and they shall say, What man is there that is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return unto his house, lest his brother's heart faint, as well as his heart. So there's just admonition after admonition saying you need to control your fear. If you are fearful, you cannot go out there and fight. And notice why you can't go out there and fight. You're going to bring down your brethren as well. So if you do, if you're thinking about evangelism, if you cannot control your fear, you should not be out there at all. You shouldn't be out there knocking on doors. If you can't control your fear, you shouldn't be doing small town soul winning. You should be, you should not be out there because you're bringing down your brethren. Now, it's natural to be nervous. It's natural to have fear. A lot of people are fearful for public speaking. I was a big person, who was fearful of public speaking. Probably about 10 years ago, I was absolutely petrified to give a speech. So I actually signed up for this class called Toastmasters. And basically, it was like a 1 hour per week. We would get together and we'd learn concepts about public speaking and so forth. And I remember the first day, I was so nervous. I had a hard time introducing myself in front of 10 people. I did not like standing. When I came to church, my very first time here, I had to stand up and introduce myself. I did not like that, okay? So anyway, I'm at this Toastmasters, and there were about 3 or 4 people who gave 5 or 10-minute speeches. They were the best speakers I've ever seen. And I went up to one of them afterward, and I shook his hand. I said, man, you were amazing. And he said, when I first started, I was so petrified of public speaking. I couldn't give a speech and so forth. And I said, well, how many speeches does it take for that fear to go away? He said, that fear never goes away. You just have to learn to control it. And when I say control is, it's quite natural if you're a performer of an instrument. It's quite natural if you're an athlete. It's quite natural if you're evangelizing. You're going to have some nervousness. But the key is you have to control it to such a point is you have to do it anyway. Keep your mouth shut so you don't bring other people down as well. So we need to control our fear. Amen. Same thing with evangelism. Now, 9 years ago, I was a brand new soul winner. And I had about 7 or 8 mentors who taught me soul winning. And I really looked up to these guys. Now, one of them was Dave Berzins. Another one was Jason Robinson. So it was a lot of fun to see that Jason Robinson was here, here preaching Sunday morning, as well as Dave Berzins and so forth. And I tell you what, I was so nervous about going soul winning, I was nervous to be the silent partner. Most silent partners are probably not nervous about soul winning. Now, you can tell, those of you who are experienced and you have new silent partners, sometimes you can tell whether they're nervous. If they're standing 15 feet behind you when at the door, they're probably a little nervous, okay? Ideally, you'd like your partner right next to you or right behind you. But I was really nervous, and I didn't want to be standing 15 feet behind Dave Berzins. I didn't want to be standing 15 feet behind Jason Robinson. So I just kind of purposed my heart, I'm going to stand right next to him, shoulder to shoulder. But quite frankly, I was pretty nervous for quite some time. Now, it took me about 10 weeks to get comfortable with giving the gospel. Well, during the same time as there was another guy in our congregation, his name was David Jr., he was a 13-year-old boy, and he was a new guy with me as well. So we were both silent partners.
Now, there was a time, and it was a Wednesday night soul winning where Dave Burson was leading the group, and he normally had multiple experienced preachers for Dave Jr. and myself to take us out. But on this particular Wednesday, nobody was there. It was only Dave Burzins, and we had a brand new soul winner. He wanted to take that person out. So Brother Burzins, he turned to David Jr. and myself. He said, hey, I don't have anybody for you. It's probably time for one of you to step up and start talking. Do I have any volunteers? Because, he really wanted the 2x2 and things like that. Well, before I opened my mouth and said, I'm not ready, we need to do a foursome here. David Jr. spoke up, a 13-year-old boy. He said, I'll give it a shot. He said, I've been practicing all day. I think I'm ready. So he was my final mentor. He was my number 8 mentor. And so here I am. I'm in my 40s, and this guy's 13 years old. He's my mentor, okay? And I was really proud of this guy. I mean, I was praying for this guy big time. I really believe that the silent partner needs to do a lot of praying, out there soul winning. If you want to see a harvest out there, yeah, you need to do some serious praying. So I'm praying for David Jr. We're walking up the first door. And the nice thing is we were in a receptive area. We're about two miles away, South Phoenix. So I'm thinking, this is going to be great. He's going to knock the first door. Maybe he'll get a salvation. Well, he knocks the door, and the door just rips open. And 13-year-old Dave Jr., he says, hey, I'm from Faith the Word Baptist Church, inviting you to church. Can I give you an invitation? And the guy was me. He said, get off my property, you punk. There's no way I'm taking your invitation. Why on earth are you even inviting me to church? I thought, whoa. I mean, I have to knock about 2,000 doors to get a response like that. Here's his first door. He's getting a response like that. Without batting an eye, David Jr. said, hey, more important than going to church, if you're to die today, are you 100% sure if you're going to heaven? And the guy just looked at the 13-year-old boy, and he just slammed his door as hard as he could, and the house shook. Well, I was furious. I almost put my foot through the door and said, why are you talking to a 13-year-old boy like that? But I kept my cool, and we're walking down the sidewalk, and I'm just trying to think of something comforting for this guy, to say something, hey, it doesn't always happen like that. You know that. It's just a freak accident, first door in a receptive neighborhood, and you get punked like that. Well, before I can open up my words, open up my mouth, he spoke up and said, I did a great job. And I had no idea what he was talking about. He said, my big goal is I don't want to have fear out here. And my big goal is if that person's rude on my first question, no matter what, I'm going to ask him the second question. This guy was a jerk to me. This guy was mean, but I stood my ground and I asked the second question. I did a great job. I said, you did a super job. And we went the rest of the night and he got 2 people saved. So when I think of controlling your fear, when I think of overcoming your fear, I think of David Jr., this 13-year-old boy, who the first door he knocked on just got ripped on, and he countered back, and he did not back down. So characteristic number 1 of guerrilla warfare, let's go to Matthew chapter 10, is it's typically a group of people who do a short-term mission, whether it's just knocking some blocks, knocking a small town, knocking an Indian reservation, or going on a mission trip where you move as a small team, you go in there, you get a lot of results, and you move out of there very quickly. And the thing that you must do if you're going to be successful in small town soul winning or any time evangelism, you must control your fear. Now, let's get a little more specific about small town soul winning. It seems that Jesus spent about 70 verses talking about small town soul winning. Most of it's basically Matthew chapter 10, Mark chapter 6, Luke chapter 9, Luke chapter 10, but the bulk of his teaching is Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, verse 5. These 12 Jesus sent forth and commanded them, saying, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and in the way of any city of the Samaritans, enter ye not. So Jesus is giving some direction or some directives to his disciples about soul winning. So my first point is you must have some preparation. If you're going to do any small town soul winning, you must have some preparation. And there's a parable out there, if you fail to plan, you'll plan to fail, okay? You must have more preparation. And what I found is, through my experience, the more prepared you are, the better it's going to get. Now, I don't know about you if you've experienced it, but I've experienced it, and maybe I've been guilty of this. Sometimes you go to soul winning, and your leader has no idea where you're going to go, and you go to a map, take a photograph of the map, you have no idea what's on the other side of that map. I've gone on some soul winning where we would show up to the neighborhood, and it's just all commercial property, no doors be knocked. Or you show up and it's all expensive condominiums, there's no way to get in, and you just kind of look at each other like, okay, what do we do now? And the map is back at the church building, and you're like 5 miles down the road, okay? So it's the number one thing is you must have some preparation, and the more prepared you are, the better. What I like to do when I ran the Sunday soul winning is I not only like to have some maps ready, but I tried to actually go in the neighborhood as well and get a feel for the neighborhood, whether we're going to get 10 people saved, 20 people saved, 30 people saved, and so forth. And I actually knew the people in my group well enough. Is like I would kind of pick some houses and say, okay, I think that person's going to do well here, and it kind of had a game plan what that neighborhood was like before I even went down there. And what's good is once you know the neighborhood, whether it's going to be receptive or not, sometimes I'll knock some doors just to get a feel for the reception. You can either plan as if this is going to be a horrible neighborhood, I'm going to do, after 1 or 2 hours, I'm going to take my group to a more receptive neighborhood and so forth. So what I found is the better prepared that I've been, the better it was for the team as well. And I would say the most important thing about preparing soul winning, about small town evangelism, Indian reservation, or anything is you have to keep your people busy. You have to let them knock as many doors as they want to knock, okay? So anytime you have people standing around not knowing what to do, you kind of drop the ball as a leader, okay? You kind of drop the ball on preparation. So here we see right off the bat, Jesus is giving some direction. He's telling them not to go on the Gentiles. He's telling them to go among the Jews. So there is some preparation work. And you know, when Jesus was going back to Jerusalem to be crucified, he passed through Samaria. He actually had a team of people going to Samaria to help prepare the way for him. So he was a big guy on preparation. So point number one about small town soul winning is you must be prepared, and the more prepared you are, the better it will go. Verse 6, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As ye go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely ye have received, freely give. Provide neither gold, nor silver, nor brass in your purses, nor scrip for your journey, neither 2 coats, neither shoes, nor yet staves. For the workman is worthy of his meat. For the workman is worthy of his meat. The second point is the workman is worthy of his meat. And our philosophy here about small town soul winning is we try to cover as many expenses as we can. We try to cover the gasoline, the transportation, and the food and so forth. And let me tell you something. For me, planning, the food's the most difficult part. That has been the biggest thorn in my side, you know, on the Indian reservations or small town soul winning and so forth. And I'll give you an example. My first big city soul winning marathon was Los Angeles. Now, I would imagine that was maybe our 10th big city soul winning. Leading up to Los Angeles, I think Atlanta, Georgia was our number one as far as reception. We got a lot of people saved in Atlanta, Georgia. So that was kind of the benchmark, is what to shoot for as far as trying to surpass. Well, let me tell you something. In Los Angeles, it was extremely receptive. We got a lot of people saved in the morning. And I think my team of 8, we had over 30 salvations, 35 salvations, and so forth. So when we came back to lunch, we were buzzing, and all the other teams were like that as well. We were going to blow apart the Atlanta numbers, okay? It was very receptive, that part of Los Angeles that we were in. But the problem is the lunch took 2 hours and 45 minutes. I don't know what happened with the planning there, but you know, I took my team back, and there was no food there for about 45, 50 minutes. And when the food came, there were long lines to get to it, and we ran out of food. So by the time my team ate, we were out there for 2 hours and 45 minutes. So we went back out for the afternoon, and my team only had 45 minutes to do soul winning. We didn't beat the Atlanta numbers. But you know, if we would have run that a little bit better, you know, we would probably crush the Atlanta numbers and so forth. So you know, I don't blame the people who are doing it, because I know how hard it is to feed a bunch of people and so forth. And you know, when we do the Indian reservations, sometimes it's hard. If I bring 12 people into an Indian reservation, sometimes it takes 2 hours to eat lunch. Well, we don't have 2 hours to eat lunch. we allocate 45 to 60 minutes and so forth. So, sometimes that's very difficult to handle. Now, one blessing that has been for us is this Tohono O'odham. They don't have any restaurants at all. So we brown bag and bring our own lunches down there. That's been a great blessing, because now people are eating in the van. We're only wasting 30 minutes. A lot of people want to go out soul winning, after 30 minutes. So we're racking up, bigger numbers, knocking a lot more doors and so forth. And I have a feeling when we go back to small town soul winning, we'll probably just do that. First of all, it's like 20% cheaper. But secondly, people do a lot more soul winning, because you're not out there, at the restaurant and you're just waiting for 2 hours to be fed if you have 20 people and 30 people and so forth. So number 2 is the workman is worthy of his meat. We try to cover as much expenses as possible. Let's go on. Verse 11. Into whatsoever city or town ye enter, inquire who in it is worthy, and there abide till you go thence. And when you come into an house, salute it. If the house be worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it be not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoso shall not receive you, nor hear your words when you depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet. Verily I say unto you, it should be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Okay, so this deals with rejection. How do you handle rejection? Okay, Jesus tells us to let your peace to return unto you. Okay, now Galatians chapter 5 verse 6 says, for in Jesus Christ neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but faith which worketh by love. But faith which worketh by love. What that tells me is the thing that motivates a saved person to work is love. If someone's saved and they do any work for God, it's because of their love for God. Okay? Now, we all know you don't have to go to church to get saved. We all know that you don't have to tithe to get saved. We all know that you don't have to go soul winning to get saved. Okay? Those things are only or what you do if you want to please Jesus. Jesus says, he loved me, keep my commandments. So the saved people that you see who go to church consistently, the saved people that you see tithe, the saved people that you see going soul winning is because they have a lot of love in them. There's a lot of saved people who don't go soul winning. There's a lot of saved people who don't go to church. There's a lot of saved people who don't tithe. That just tells me they don't have a whole lot of love in them. Because the verse says, but faith which worketh by love. The thing that causes saved people to work is their love. 2 weeks ago, my wife asked me, she said, how come the Baptist churches are so small and the Pentecostal churches are so big? And my response is, well, first of all, a lot of people who go to Baptist churches are saved. A lot of people who are saved will probably end up in a Baptist church. And a lot of people who are saved don't go to church. So that's why a lot of Baptist churches are not saved, okay? A lot of Baptist churches are very small. But the Pentecostals, there's a lot of Pentecostals who go to church because they think they have to go to church to get saved. A lot of Pentecostals tithe because they think they have to tithe in order to get saved. A lot of Pentecostals do works for God because they think they have to do them. So the difference is the saved person, he works out of his love for the Lord Jesus Christ. The unsaved person, they're working out of their own benefit to hopefully work their way to heaven. So I believe that's a huge reason why a lot of Baptist churches are small and a lot of Pentecostal churches are big, okay, as well. Now, bearing that in mind, those of you who go soul winning, a lot of reasons why you go soul winning is your love. Your love for people and your love for the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, when you go soul winning, and I feel this as well, when I knock that door, I really want that door to open up. I really want that person to get saved. When I give the gospel, I'm about to ready to cry at times. I really want that person to get saved. I have a lot of love for them. Before that door opens, I have a lot of love because I'm doing it for the right reasons. So what happens if that person is rude to you? Well, Jesus tells us, let your peace return to you. So that love you had when you rang that doorbell, if that person is rude, if that person is a jerk, you need to allow that peace to come back to you and not let that influence you as you go to the next door, okay? So whatever happens at one door, you cannot let it tear you down. You must allow that peace to come back to you so you can keep knocking on doors. Now, I keep a lot of statistics when I go soul winning. When I go soul winning in Phoenix, I typically have to knock 28 to 30 doors for each salvation. 28 to 30 doors. So I'm getting a lot of rejections just in that. And you know there's neighborhoods out there where you knock 200 doors and you're not going to get a salvation and so forth. So you really have to make sure that your peace comes back onto you. And that 59th house you knock on, you have to have the same amount of love as you did on the first door as well. And what I've noticed is people who go to a lot of very unreceptive neighborhoods over and over and over, they seem to lose that peace, okay? A lot of them, sometimes they seem to be timid. They almost assume that people are not going to want to hear and so forth. And when they do get in the gospel, sometimes they rush their gospel, or they don't even open up their Bible, just assuming they're going to be shut down and so forth. You have to get rid of that mentality. You have to treat each door like it's your very first door, and you have to have that same amount of love, as for each single door. Not only that, but he also says in verse 14, and whosoever shall not receive you nor hear your words when you depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet. Verily I say unto you, it should be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than that for that city. That's a very strong verse, verse 15. Those people who reject you, or specifically, he's telling the people who reject his disciples, it's going to be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah than it is for those people who reject him. What's he talking about? Well, God showed a lot of mercy in Sodom and Gomorrah when he brought down Sodom and Gomorrah. He blasted them early in the morning. Those people were sound asleep, especially if Lot would have moved out a little faster. I would imagine all those people would have been sound asleep. They died in their sleep, okay? Those Romans, when they went after these same people who turned down the disciples, they didn't die in their sleep. Those Roman soldiers, they probably cut them with the swords in the middle of the day. It was less tolerable for them than it was for Sodom and Gomorrah. That also carries to us. Those households that turn us down, we just have to trust. God's speaking very strongly against those households. Those households who shut you down, it's going to be bad for them later on in the future if they don't repent and believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. And I kind of experienced this. We do something called helicopter soul winning, at the Indian reservations where the houses are so far apart. And sometimes I drive the team up to the driveway and I watch them get out and knock the door. And when I see a team of two get out, who basically they're on there because they're volunteers, they've taken a day off from work and they're willing to go down to just the desert or whatever and go soul winning. You got wind blowing, you got dogs barking at them. They're willing to walk up that door. I feel very proud for them, and I want them to get someone saved. And when I hear someone turn them down, I get mad. I mean, that's just my natural reaction. My thought is, you idiot. These people just come like 4 hours and knock on your door, and they've just walked through, and they got dirt all over them. They got dogs jumping over them, and you shut them down. And, quite frankly, I haven't seen a car drive by for 2 hours. What do you have to do out here? Except, listen to some person give you the gospel. I mean, what else do you have to do with your day? You don't have a job. You don't have any hobbies or anything. Why not just, listen to them for 15 minutes? And I get a little angry. I would imagine God gets a little angry with people, too, when his soul winner knocks on the door and they shut them down. It sounds like he gets so angry with them that's going to be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah than those doors that shut you down. So if we keep that in mind, if we know that God the Father is just watching over us and he's going to rain fire and brimstone on these guys, hopefully it'll help bring us some peace so we can allow the peace to come back to us. Okay. Verse 16, behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Jesus is telling us to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Okay. We need to become better soul winners the longer we go. We need to be stronger soul winners. We need to have more wisdom the longer that we're a Christian, okay? We need to constantly build up our knowledge and get better, okay? If you're a soul winner for 5 years, you should be a better soul winner now than you were 5 years ago, okay? You should be able to handle a lot more doctrine. If you're going to church 3 times a week, if you're reading your Bible, if you're listening to preaching, you should be very strong each year that you go soul winning. You need to be wise as serpents, okay? Now, the Bible says, Philippians chapter 2, verse 12, wherefore, my beloved, as ye have always obeyed, not as my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God which worketh in you both to will and do his good pleasure. The Bible tells us to work out our salvation. The Bible tells us to exercise ourselves unto godliness. We need to work out our faith. We need to work out our spiritual man and get stronger every single year. I use this example because I get this question a lot when people call in our church and they say, how do you handle Philippians chapter 2, verse 12? Isn't that teaching works-based salvation when it says work out your salvation with fear and trembling? No, that just tells you to work out. That just tells you to exercise. You know, I like to lift weights. A couple days ago, I trained my biceps, and my goal is to make my biceps bigger, stronger, so they can do more work, okay? Now, in order to work out your biceps, you have to have biceps to begin with, okay? It's impossible to work out your biceps if you don't have biceps, okay? Same thing without working out your salvation. It's impossible to work out your salvation if you don't have salvation. God wants us to work out our salvation so we can do more work for Him, okay? So the more you go soul winning, you should be able to handle the more difficult doors more and more. There was a time, probably about 3 years ago, I'd been soul winning for about 5 or 6 years ago. I was up in North Phoenix, and I knocked the door of a man, and he was in a hurry. He said, hey, my daughter has a birthday party. I have to go out and buy her some soda pop. I can't talk to you right now. And my response was, okay, well, if you're so interested, can we talk a little bit later? We're going to be in your neighborhood for another hour or two. Can we come back? And surprisingly, he said, yeah. So I said, okay, when are you going to be back? He said, about 45 minutes. I said, okay, we'll be back in 45 minutes. So my partner and I, we came back 45 minutes later, and the guy introduced us. He actually led us in his house, and he had a genuine interest in hearing what we had to say. So he sat us down, and he said, you know, I love to listen to Mormons. I love to listen to Jehovah's Witnesses. I love to read about Buddha, Hinduism, things like that. I love to hear about all these different doctrines, and I like to formulate my own religion. So I take a little bit from Hinduism, I take a little bit from Buddhism, I take a little bit from Jehovah's Witnesses, and so forth. He said, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Maybe you can add to my religion. So I said, okay. I said, my gospel presentation is 14 minutes long. And you know, my request is you allow me to preach the entire gospel presentation for 14 minutes and you don't ask any questions. And at the end of the 14 minutes, if you have a question, I'd be happy to answer you. He said, okay, agreed. So I give my 14-minute discussion or gospel presentation, and at the end of it, he was kind of speechless. And he said, I've never heard that preached ever before. And he said, I have a lot of questions. So he asked me questions that he learned from the Hinduism. He asked me questions about Buddhism. He asked me questions about Jehovah's Witnesses and things like that. He asked me about aliens, dinosaurs. He asked me about homosexuality. He asked me about rape and murder. He asked me everything. What is heaven like? What is hell like? And so forth. I was there for 2 hours. I was getting exhausted. And I was getting mentally exhausted, and I just kept thinking to myself, he's eventually going to ask me a question I can't answer. But he was pushing me to limits. And finally, after 2 hours, he said, you know, you answered all my questions. Everything I believed was wrong. I need to call upon the name of the Lord Jesus Christ right now. Okay. I would not have been able to get that guy saved my first year of soul winning. I would not have been able to get that guy saved my second year of soul winning. It took a good solid 5 years of just reading the Bible, going soul winning to handle this guy. And this guy got saved. And quite frankly, there were probably not too many soul winners out there who could have gotten this guy saved, except for unless you had a lot of experience reading the Bible. So this guy took me to the max. Okay, you will have doors like that. And if you're wise as serpents, if you continue to grow in the Lord, you're going to be you can handle doors like that, okay? Instead of just getting a few easy doors, and that's all you get saved. So the more you go soul winning, you must increase your knowledge. You must get better. You must be wise as serpents, okay? Verse 17, but beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils, and they will scourge you in their synagogues, and ye shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, take no thought about how or what ye shall speak, for it shall be given you in that same hour what ye shall speak. Now, for the next 30 verses, 20 verses, he's talking about persecution. He's talking about how do you handle persecution. Okay, let's go to verse 23. But when they persecute you in this city, flee you into another, for verily I say unto you, ye shall not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. Okay. Now, he's telling you when you're persecuted, you need to get out of there. Now, the context of this is if they're trying to kill you. If you're preaching in an area and they're trying to kill you, yeah, you need to get out of there, okay? You need to move on to the next door. You need to move on to the next county store. This is not talking about an angry apartment manager. This is not talking about tribal police. This is not talking about an angry police officer, and I appreciate that Pastor Anderson mentioned this. He kind of stole my thunder. But basically, if someone's persecuting you for anything other than trying to kill you, you stand your ground. Okay? You shut them down. Okay? Jesus is saying if they persecute to the point where they're trying to kill you, yeah, you move on. If you don't, you just stand your ground. Okay? We came to an apartment complex in Mesa, and I looked at this apartment complex. It was 60 doors. I'm thinking in my mind, 5 salvation, 6 salvation. It looked right for the picking. And as soon as we started knocking doors, there was some angry tenant who just started yelling at us, saying, "You can't be here," and things like that. Well, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I can get 5 people saved if this guy shuts up. And I told the guy, I said, I don't care what you say or what you do, I'm not leaving until I knock these 60 doors. Well, he got angry, he got huffy and puffy, he went to a couple other attendants, now I got 3 guys against me yelling at me and so forth. But I said, I don't care what you do. I mean, even if they try grabbing me, I'm not going to turn the other cheek and walk out the door. I'm just going to keep knocking these doors, whether these guys are hanging on me or not. I can get 5 or 6 people saved, okay? Now, it turned out it was a pretty wicked apartment complex. I didn't get anybody saved. Now, I did plant a very good seed with a Romanian man. I did give him the full gospel. He said, man, I need to seriously think about that. Maybe that guy's saved right now. But if an apartment complex manager comes to you, or if a police officer comes to you, that is not what Jesus talked about, saying, go on to the next city. You stand your ground, and, if they throw you in prison, if they, whatever. And I'm glad that Pastor Anderson said we're going to pay the fine, because I was going to say that anyway. I'm sure we'll pay the fine or whatever. And, we have an Indian reservation coming up. Our last Indian reservation, that might be pretty vicious. They might be huffing and puffing. They might try to do stuff to it. But let me tell you something. I might have to have the Deuteronomy 20 discussion with people. If you're fearful, you can't come on this group. We're not backing down with that reservation. There's about 5,000 people on that reservation. We're not backing down. I'm not driving up there for 4 hours to come back in 20 minutes. So those people who are going up there, we are going to knock those doors whether they like it or not. Okay? Unless they try to kill us, we're going to knock those doors. And that needs to be the principle when he's talking about persecution. And this is pretty important. He talks about for 20 verses. This is his number 1 teaching. When they persecute you, you stand your ground unless they're trying to kill you, and then you pull out. Okay. So, verse 36, and a man's foes, because this is after the persecution, shall be they of his own household. Okay. Now, obviously, if you have relatives who are telling you you're going to a cult and things like that, that's a good manifestation. Then of this, that you can have members or relatives who try to prevent you or who are your enemies as well. But I think also it mentions household. Our first work, our first love should be soul winning. If you have a member in your household who prevents you to go soul winning, you need to seriously look at this, okay? I got babies in my family. I have a wife who has to take care of babies and so forth. Now, when I read this, if I allow my babies to prevent me to go soul winning, I kind of view as that little baby is a foe, to myself, to my walk. Even though I'm married and I have kids, I still believe I need to do a lot of soul winning. The commandment for my wife before she got married was for her to go in the world and preach the gospel to every creature. My commandment as a single man was to go out and preach the gospel to every single creature. My commandment to my wife, now that she's married, is the same commandment. My commandment to myself, even though I'm married, is the same commandment. I believe very strongly as a leader of the household, and the Bible speaks very strongly about the leader of the household, Matthew chapter 24, who then is a faithful and wise servant who the Lord made ruler over his household to give them meat in due season. I believe that God is maybe ruler over my household, and I need to give my family meat. I need to give my family members an opportunity to go out soul winning. Soul winning, in my opinion, is your number 1 work. When I do a lot of soul winning, I see my Bible reading increase dramatically. I see my Bible understanding increase dramatically. I see sin coming out of my life dramatically. I see a lot of powerful, just a powerful manifestations of the Spirit coming when I do a lot of soul winning. I want the same thing for my wife as well. So I make sure, especially small town soul winning, she goes out there and knocks a lot of doors. My goal, we're at the point now is she's knocking more doors now than she was when she was a single woman. Now, I'm not knocking as many doors, but I'm getting better at it. And my goal is about another month, I'll be knocking just as many doors as I was before when I was single, than, as a married man with 2 kids. I believe very strongly if you and your spouse are committed to this, and you're willing to change some diapers, you're willing to, feed some babies or hang out with the babies, you and your wife can do a lot of soul winning together. I learned a powerful lesson about 6 or 7 years ago. 6 or 7 years ago, I was in charge of the Sunday soul winning here. So I drove the van and so forth. And at that time, we probably averaged about 5 to 8 soul winners per Sunday afternoon. Well, on this particular day, it was a very hot day. It was 110 degrees, and for whatever reason, nobody showed up except for a family who was visiting from out of town, from New Mexico, and it's Gabriel Martinez. Now, it was a big honor for me to take him out soul winning because he was one of my 8 mentors. So here I'm taking my mentor out soul winning, and he's got his whole family with him. It was he, his wife, and I believe they had 4 or 5 kids at the same time. They went out soul winning in 110-degree heat for 3 hours, 3.5 hours. And it was interesting how they did it. We're all in the van. I pull up to a neighborhood. I get out, and Gabriel gets out with 2 of his kids, and we leapfrogged, and we did 1 full block. We just basically did a circle, okay? While we're out soul winning, his wife is in the car or the van with the rest of their kids, and they're playing, they're drawing, they're doing their crayons and things like that. They're doing whatever. We get back in the van. I drive the van 1 block down. I get out, and then she gets out with a couple kids, and we leapfrog and do that, block. We get, during that time, he's hanging out with the kids, the other kids in the van and so forth. It was almost like they were on a road trip to Disneyland. We probably cranked out 8 or 9 blocks. They got a lot of people saved. I got people saved, and they controlled 4 or 5 kids and so forth. So that taught me a powerful lesson is if you're married and you have a lot of kids, you can still do a lot of soul winning. Even if it's 110 degrees out, people have no problems just dumping their kids in an SUV and going to Disneyland for 6 or 7 hours. Why not just throw your kids in an SUV and just, turn on the idle? I just basically ran the motor on idle and had the air conditioning going, and they just played around in there like they were just playing inside their house, or like they were just on a road trip and so forth. So if you and your wife, if you're committed about doing the first works, you can really do a lot of soul winning with your wife or with your kids, even if you have a lot of kids, even if you have 4 or 5 kids. So I believe very strongly that we need, as leaders of the household, we need to make sure our spouses do a lot of soul winning. And we need to make sure that our kids do a lot of soul winning as well. And that certainly can be done. Okay. Verse 37, he that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. He that receiveth you receiveth me, and he that receiveth me receiveth him that sent me. Verse 41, he that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. And he that receiveth a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoso shall give to drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water only in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward. I believe when I read this is if you're a soul winner, if you're a disciple of Christ, God values you very much. Okay. Those people who bless you will be blessed by him. Those people who bless you because you're a disciple, because you're a soul winner, those people who help you out, who give you water, food, money, and so forth, God is going to reward them greatly because of that. They're going to get the prophet's reward and so forth. So this hopefully should let you know just how valuable we are by becoming soul winners and so forth. Okay, that's Matthew chapter 10. Let's go to Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6 is basically a parallel passage. It's definitely a condensed
It's a lot shorter in Matthew 10. But I see one point in Mark chapter 6 that I did not see in Matthew chapter 10. Mark chapter 6, verse 6, and he marveled because of their unbelief, and he went round about the villages teaching, and he called unto him the 12, and began to send them forth by two and two, and gave them power over unclean spirits. Notice he's sending them out two by two. We did not see this in Matthew chapter 10. We see this in Luke chapter 10 and so forth. I believe very strongly there is, when we obey Jesus' commands, we're going to get a lot of people saved. Okay. I believe very strongly to try to go out two by two because, he's directing them. Okay. There's a lot of reasons to have a good soul-winning partner. Number one, you have the fellowship. Number two, your soul-winning partner can deflect the dog if he goes after you, or deflect a child if he goes, if he becomes to a nuisance and so forth. But I think personally, the number one thing that the silent partner can do is pray for you. I believe very strongly when I'm the silent partner, I try to pray a lot. And I expect, when my silent partner opens up his Bible, I expect that person to get saved. And I am going to pray for the next 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and so forth for that salvation to happen. That's my expectation, and that's what I pray. And, that's God's will as well, I would see most of the time. So I believe very strongly I need to do a lot of praying. Now, what's interesting, or what seems to happen, I've noticed, especially on the missions trips, a lot of experienced soul winners, they don't like to go out two by two. They just like to go out on their own, and they want all the doors, and they want all the speaking opportunities. And I noticed that people who seem to be obedient two by two seem to get a lot more people saved. When we were in Malawi, there were people who went out two by two quite a bit, and those two-man teams sometimes got 23 to 30 salvations per day. People who went out just on their own, oftentimes they get 6 or 7 salvations and so forth. Now, that's great getting 6 or 7, but I'd rather have 23 to 30 salvations in there. And I think there's something to say about that. When you have your partner praying for you, I really think there's a special anointing with that, or I really think the Holy Spirit is stronger. I don't know. I just see the results there. Okay. Now, there was a time I was giving the gospel at the door, and this person was very receptive. And I'm thinking, this guy is going to get saved. And I'm about 1 minute from leading him to Christ, and it just went south. I don't remember if the guy's mom showed up, chewed me out, grabbed him, slammed the door, or whatever, but something happened, I didn't get the salvation. And I was shocked. I thought to myself, I can't believe that just happened. Now, my partner was a pretty experienced guy. I knew him pretty well, and I kind of turned to him. I raised my hands. I said, "What are you doing back there? Were you praying?" And he went, and he was shocked too. He said, "No, I wasn't. I'm so sorry." And so I was, halfway kidding about, but I really feel that here I had this salvation, and my partner's not praying. Maybe I lost that salvation because my partner's not praying and so forth. Okay? So I believe very strongly, if you go out by two, even if you have to shut up half the time, if you're praying, first of all, that's a lot of work to pray for 15 minutes. Okay, that's almost as much work to pray for 15 minutes as it is to give the gospel presentation for 15 minutes. I go out soul winning for a couple hours with a person, a partner. I'm exhausted because I'm either giving the gospel or I'm praying, okay? I believe very strongly, it seems that when people go out and are obedient to the 2 by 2, they seem to get a lot more people saved, and I have a feeling that's the reason why. In Malawi, we had a lot of people go out by 2 by 2. Now, I noticed in Jamaica, I had a lot of experienced soul winners in Jamaica. Nobody went out 2 by 2. I mean, as soon as I parked the van, boom, everybody just scattered, and they're giving the gospel. Well, they're doing a lot of talking, but we rarely had anybody get more than 8 or 9 or 10 people saved, okay? I have a feeling if I would have been a little more disciplined with them and say, okay, you need to go out 2 by 2, we might have racked up some higher numbers and so forth. It's great that everybody wants to talk, but I really feel when Jesus is telling you to go out 2 by 2, if we are obedient to that, I believe there is a blessing associated with that. So that's something I see different in Mark chapter 6. Let's go to Luke chapter 10 for my final point, or final 2 points. No, I'll be done in about 3 minutes. It's amazing how 70 verses can get you talking for a long time. Yeah. Luke chapter 10, verse 12. But I say unto you that it should be more tolerable in that day for Sodom and Gomorrah, for that city. Okay, that's not what I want to talk about.
what I want to talk about. Okay, it's when he prays for more laborers of the harvest. Verse 2, therefore said he unto them, the harvest truly is great, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he would send forth laborers into his harvest. This is something new, something different from Matthew chapter 10, something different from Mark chapter 6. We need to pray for more laborers in the harvest. I mentioned when I was leading the Sunday soul winning group years ago, my big prayer was I wanted 70 people in this church to go soul winning every single Sunday. Okay? Because when I look at Luke chapter 10, that when he sent out 70 disciples, when he sent out 70 apostles, that Satan fell like lightning, out of heaven. My belief is you get 70 people out soul winning, Satan's going to fall like lightning. So I back then I thought it'd be pretty cool if we just made Satan fall like lightning every single Sunday afternoon, because we had more than 70 soul winners. Back then we had 10 or 15 soul winners going out on a Sunday. Now we have way more than 70 soul winners out on a Sunday. I believe that's an answer to prayer, as well as a lot of many other prayers, people praying for laborers in the harvest. But it's been amazing how just in the last 5 or 6 years, we've not only tripled but quadrupled. We have a huge soul winning force, and we need to keep continuing that prayer, and hopefully just make Satan fall like lightning every single day in Tempe, okay, and so forth. So that's one teaching. The final teaching is verse 19, chapter 10, verse 19. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. This is, Jesus' mandate that when you go out soul winning, if you're in his will, nothing is going to hurt you. I don't care what kind of neighborhood you're in. I don't care what kind of country you're in. I don't care what the murder rate is. I don't care if there are dead bodies laying in the street. If you're in God's will, nothing is going to hurt you. I believe very strongly if we send 30 people to the worst country in the world, that God is going to protect them. Nothing will hurt you. I believe very strongly about that. So we need to control that fear. If there's any fear, that we need to control that and just take him at his word. Nothing is going to hurt you. Okay. So that's my final point on that. So basically, the title of this message is Guerrilla Warfare Evangelism, Small Town Soul Winning. And when I was coming back from Botswana, when I got kicked out of Botswana after 3 days, I had no idea what my future was here at Faith of the Word Baptist Church. I basically sold everything I had or thrown away everything I had. I wasn't planning on coming back. I wasn't planning on coming back to visit my family or anything like that. I was planning on just staying out there. But when I started coming back on that flight, I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea why I was coming back. I put a lot of thought to Botswana, put my heart to Botswana. My wife, she wanted to live in Botswana and so forth. So I had no idea why I was coming back. But now it's kind of making sense. We've seen a lot of powerful works in Malawi. We've seen a lot of powerful works in Guyana. We've seen a lot of powerful things done in Jamaica, and that's just going to continue to roll. We now coined the term do-it-yourself evangelism. I call it guerrilla warfare evangelism, but do-it-yourself missions and evangelism. We've seen a major shift like that. We've seen other churches, change to that kind of mentality instead of the Goliath mentality when you raise up your champion, just see him get his head cut off. We've seen a major shift. We've seen a lot of momentum going down this path. I believe it is a biblical path. And maybe if I was in Botswana, that would not have happened. I don't know. Maybe someone else would have stood up and took my place. I don't know. But I just know the last year and a half it's been a lot of fun to see guys like you, people volunteering to go to the Indian reservations, people volunteering to go do small town soul winning, people volunteering to almost shading that entire map. It's been encouraging to me. It's been wonderful, seeing especially seeing this mega marathon. If I was in Botswana, I wouldn't be seeing this happen. I'd probably be doing something in Botswana. But it's just I have a feeling that maybe God has a greater work for us, and maybe it would have been worse for me to be in Botswana. And my opinion about vaccines. I'd be in prison right now because of my view of vaccines and so forth. So maybe there's a reason why I came here. But I just definitely know for the last 18 months, it's been a lot of fun to see God working through this church and like-minded people and just doing powerful evangelism, guerrilla warfare evangelism, small town soul winning, Indian reservation soul winning, big city soul winning, mega marathon soul winning. It's been a lot of fun. And if we're getting close to the last days, it's going to be a lot of fun to see that. And if we crush that record of the day of Pentecost, that's going to be great. And if we crush that every single year, that's going to be a lot of fun. And I thank you for this opportunity to preach, and I look forward to going door to door with you in the future, and just doing a small town soul winning with you and so forth. But let's go ahead and pray. Dear God, I thank you for this opportunity to preach this word. I pray it'll be understandable, encouraging, and I pray that give people a greater knowledge of small town soul winning, and as well as soul winning in general, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.